Hey everybody, and Tony here with a review of the British-Canadian animated sitcom It's the Mr. Hell Show, which aired on BBC Two from October 28, 2001 to February 18, 2002. This was created by Dave Friedman and Alan Gilby. It was directed by Andy Bartlett, John Pagan, Tim Stubbe, Rob Boutillier, Michael Grimshaw, Keith Ingham, and Paul Boyd. It was produced by Christopher J. Bro, Gareth Edwards, David Friedman, Alan Gilby, Myphony Moore, John Ploman, and Jay Falconer. The writers were Joel Jessup, Hugh MacLeod, Simon Blackwell, Roger Drew, William James Smith, Colin Yardley, Joe Dater, Nick Osler, and Ollie Smith. The music was composed by Mark Sayer Wade, and it starred the voices of Bob Monkhouse, Jeff Swampy Marsh, and Tabitha St. Germain. I mainly came across this show through complete chance, as I was also searching for some of the best British cartoons, and a lot of people stated that this is pretty much one of them, even though it ran for 13 episodes and had some mixed reviews here and there. So I went into this expecting nothing at all, and I kind of needed something which was an irreverent comedy because considering the material I had to review for Halloween and even yesterday, those were pretty heavy stuff, so I kind of needed something to balance out the heaviness. And this was pretty much a solid solution, and here's why. Story-wise, this is pretty much an irreverent dark comedy, mostly starring a devil-like entity known as Mr. Hell. He basically graces the show being all misanthropic and pretty much being one of the biggest jerks to everyone else, and coupled with his constant screen presence are some vignettes, like Salge, the Seal of Death, who is basically this really young seal whose parents have been murdered by some mysterious stranger, and it's up to him to avenge their deaths in the most violent way possible. And of course, this other vignette which plays frequently, which features Josh, who reincarnates into several animals, but unfortunately, as he is explaining the whole concept of reincarnation, he gets mauled, butchered, and basically killed. So the overall irreverence this show has to offer in terms of its pitch black comedy is kind of hilarious, at least in my opinion, and I'm sure that this might turn off some viewers, probably because it has the tendency to be quite mean-spirited. And sure, It's the Mr. Hell Show does revel in its mean-spiritedness and nihilism, and it manages to have a lot of fun doing so. And that's what I kind of like about this show. Oh, sure, I cannot stand anything that is mean-spirited, but it always has to depend on the execution. Now, in terms of what It's the Mr. Hell Show has to offer, sure, a lot of the characters do get themselves in a lot of unpleasant and, dare I say, really nasty situations, but there are also some characters who kind of deserve these pretty nasty things happening to them, and at times it can be pretty cathartic. And sure, some of the jokes may kind of drag on from time to time, and some of them may not always sit well with me, but I still have to give a lot of credit to what the writing had to offer in terms of each of these vignettes. Sure, some of these vignettes can be kind of sick, but it's a kind of sick nature that can be quite inviting, mostly because of how fun it can be. And it has that type of attitude which just says that if you don't like it, then fine, it's your tastes anyway, we just don't care. And it does so in a way that it still manages to have a great amount of fun from beginning to end, and for 13 episodes, I thought that its run was really solid. Sure, a lot of people would have felt that this could have ran a lot longer, but I have to say that I was pretty content with what It's the Mr. Hell Show had to offer. If it would have ran a lot longer, it would have been trying to be like the next South Park, or the next Simpsons, or the next Family Guy, and from what I can tell from the comedy of the show, since it's an irreverent comedy, it does try to emulate those comedic styles. We have a lot of the death and poop jokes from South Park, the extremely irreverent comedy, and also the pop culture references from Family Guy, and of course, a good dose of British gallows humor. So overall, the story, especially in a lot of these vignettes, are kind of solid from beginning to end. Sure, some of them are pretty repetitive, but I can easily forgive some of them because nonetheless, they still manage to have a fair amount of fun. The animation is quite simple, and even though it doesn't really look all that appealing, I still have to say that it does suit the overall surreal nature pretty well. The animation serves its purpose pretty well for how weird and surreal the show can be, even though there are a lot of other greater and even grander shows and movies that can handle surrealism really well and flawlessly. But I still have to give the animation a good amount of credit for making it as surreal and pretty enjoyable and, of course, pretty weird to look at from beginning to end. So it does serve its purpose. And going back to the story, yes. The 13th episode does feel a little bit somber, especially what happened in the end, and I dare not spoil it. But for those of you who've watched the show for quite some time and even on repeats, I'm sure that the 13th episode will be kind of a tearjerker, especially if you've been sticking around with Mr. Hal and his crew for quite some time. So I'm not going to mince words here. The animation served its purpose. It was weird, it was simplistic, but nonetheless, it did feel kind of enjoyable. The music is quite catchy, especially the opening theme. The theme song is rather simplistic, yet catchy, but it does give the viewer a fine idea of what he's going to get himself into. And of course, the incidental music is actually pretty solid. There's some moments where classical pieces are being used alongside rock and pop and many other musical genres, but I have to say that the absolute standout in terms of the music is the catchy theme song, which even though it's simplistic, managed to be pretty memorable for how much of an earworm it tends to be. So I still have to give credit to the composer, Mark Sayer-Wade, for composing a pretty decent score. The characters are kind of fun to watch, even though they can be pretty messed up. Starting off with articular anti-hero Mr. Hell. Now, Mr. Hell embodies a lot of really negative things a devil should bear. He finds joy in pain. He just loves to torment a lot of people. He loves to tempt people. And he just seems to enjoy basically messing up people's lives. And he just enjoys being this misanthropic jerk. He manages to enjoy his whole presence as being this huge jerk of a character. And he nonetheless has this type of charm which makes him all the more alluring and rather interesting. Sure, he is pretty much a huge prick. He takes advantage of anything that's rather negative, and he just has this type of presence on screen which initially you want to hate him, but you can't help but feel kind of enthralled by him, mostly because of just how utterly nasty this character is. But nonetheless, he has this charisma and he has this type of charm and let's just say sexiness that makes him stand out pretty well. Josh is pretty much the perpetual butt monkey of the series. What with his constant reincarnating and how he wants to explain this concept to us, the viewers, and how he constantly gets mauled, chopped, maimed, and killed in various ways, but he's nonetheless a pretty funny character because of all the outlandish and, of course, creative ways he gets maimed and mauled and killed in general. He's still a pretty funny character, even though his joke of him trying to explain reincarnation and how it works and how many times he gets killed and mauled does get pretty old. Then we have Salge, the Seal of Death. He is by far one of my most favorite characters in this show, aside from Mr. Hell's devishly sexy nature. Salge, the Seal of Death, is on the outside a pretty cute character. What with his petite and baby-like features and his overall cutesy appearance, but once you get to know him further as a character, what with his parents being brutally murdered by an unknown poacher, thus wanting revenge on said unknown poacher, does he turn out to be quite the yandere of a character, and he manages to really do so in a way that makes him quite terrifying, but quite fascinating. His overall yandere nature and his overall determination to avenge his parents' death is, of course, kind of hilarious. But of course, having a character like Serge be traumatized from the horrible events he's experienced, especially when he is still very young and saw how his parents died before his very eyes, is not really a great source of comedy. It's more of a psychological drama. And to see this type of story be played for laughs is rather messed up. But despite how messed up the whole premise is, and despite how messed up Serge is as a character, especially when he goes into such a blind rage, unleashing his machine guns and really firing at everyone to the best of his abilities and even to the most savage of his abilities, I still have to say that Serge is a pretty funny, fascinating, yet kind of disturbing character. And he's disturbing in a way that kind of makes him rather endearing. Then we have Damien, Mr. Hell's son, who is the complete opposite of his father because he also has an angel named Angela as his mother. Damien is a very kind, soft-spoken, considerate, and really shy character, as opposed to Mr. Hell's more bombastic and in-your-face attitude for how much of a huge prick he is. Damien is basically a soft-spoken, sweet kid who doesn't really want to be nasty and who doesn't want to be such a major jerk. He is, simply put, one of the sweetest characters in the show, and even then he does have his fair share of being quite cheeky, but it's done so in a way that makes Damien all the more endearing. Then we have the Victorian lady detective. Now, she may be a very smart and very skilled and very level-headed character, but even though she is a very intelligent and very skilled and very savvy woman who is married to such a jerk of a husband, she kind of has no choice but to accept her fate as a woman who is supposed to be in the house doing all the cooking and cleaning and basically be as submissive as possible. And yet some of her arcs are played for laughs, even though she does have her fair share of having some pretty happy endings, though in a pretty twisted way. She is definitely someone who does have a lot of potential to be a pretty strong character, but because of the time she lived, she kind of had no choice. Because she is kind of fascinating, even though her whole shtick is, even though she did solve the crime, she kind of gets chewed on because she's a woman. And that's basically the joke. I'm sure that with that very vignette lies a show which had a lot of potential to be its own entity. So overall, the characters, while they're kind of messed up, have something that's kind of entertaining about them. The voice acting is very well done. The late, great British comic actor Bob Monkhouse certainly does an amazing job embodying Mr. Hell's Don Juan type of personality. He was able to make him quite sexy in terms of his smooth sounding and really soothing baritone voice, and he was able to make him quite the charmer, and a delish one at that. He was absolutely fine as Mr. Hell, and I can definitely tell that Mr. Monkhouse had a lot of fun embodying this devil of a character, with that type of grace which makes him all the more alluring and makes him just fascinating, even though his character is essentially an asshole. Jeff Swampy Marsh, who I'm sure a lot of us know him as one of the creators of Phineas and Ferb, and also one of the writers for such classics like Hey Arnold, Rocko's Modern Life, and a lot of other great classic shows, did a very fine job with bringing Josh's down-to-earth nature to life. He did a very fine vocal performance in what is otherwise a pretty thankless character. Mr. Marsh did an amazing job making Josh come to life in terms of how down-to-earth and just how welcoming he is as a character. And it's all thanks to that really warm-sounding and really fine and youthful voice, which he was able to produce so well. Tabitha St. Germain proves herself once again to be an extremely versatile voice actress, from giving life to Serge's yandere nature and his bombastic attitude, to giving Damien his sheepishly innocent nature, and to giving the Lady Victorian detective her dignified nature. She was able to do a flawless job with these three characters that I couldn't believe it was the same voice actress, especially with Serge. She almost sounded a little bit like Candy Milo voicing either Dexter from Dexter's Laboratory in its second run, and even the headmistress from Mucha Lucha. I thought she was able to do a fine job with Serge and his roguish French Canadian accent, and she did so in a way that made Serge all the more endearing. The same thing I can say about her portrayals as Damien and the Victorian lady detective. She managed to do a flawless job with all three roles, and it's all thanks to just how versatile Miss St. Germain really is. We also had such wonderful vocal performances from Scott McNeil, Paul Dobson, Phil Hayes, Gerard Plunkett, Michael Dobson, Nicole Oliver, Pauline Newstone, Sally Grace, Jonathan Lloyd Walker, and Kathy Wesseluk. So overall, It's the Mr. House Show is a kind of hit and miss show. You'll either like it because of just how rollickingly hilarious in a dark way it can be, or you might turn away from it just because of how mean-spirited and messed up it can be. But in all honesty, It's the Mr. House Show doesn't really care what your opinion is. It managed to have a lot of fun, and it does so in a way that doesn't make it seem self-aware that it seems to have fun. It does so in a way that it enjoys itself, it revels in its overall irreverence and its mean-spiritedness, and it does so in a way that makes it quite entertaining. And I have to give a lot of credit to the voice actors who are able to bring their characters to life, and of course for the writers for making a pretty solid yet dark comedy show. And with that, I give It's the Mr. House Show a solid score of 3 out of 5 stars. It's an okay package. Sure, it's not going to be for everyone because of how mean-spirited it tends to be, but it kind of doesn't care. It just wants to entertain, it just wants to have fun, and it did so in a way that made me kind of enjoy the show. Sure, it's not going to be for everyone, and not everyone is going to like it, not everyone is going to understand its brand of comedy, but nonetheless, it's still a show that kind of also needs to be rediscovered because not a lot of people remember it and not a lot of people know about it. So if you have the chance to catch this show, then by all means, go ahead. Sure, it may not be for everyone, but at least you can give it a try to see just how messed up yet kind of fun this show can really be. Well, that's all for now. Be sure to tune in for another review, and until then, blessed All Souls Day, everybody.